This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 20. Thank you for joining me today. Welcome to the 20th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I love hearing from you, so if you enjoy today's show, please stop by the blog and leave a comment in the show notes. So you'll find the show notes for today's episode and all the episodes at fertilityfriday.com/podcast. And you can find me on the Fertility Friday Facebook page, which is facebook.com/fertilityfridays with an S. And you can also find me on Twitter at fertilefriday. And in today's episode, I'm very excited to be talking with Dr. Kerry Hampton. Dr. Hampton is a registered nurse, a midwife, and an active researcher in fertility awareness and lifestyle education. And the aim of her research is to reduce the incidence of infertility by promoting fertility literacy with the fertility awareness method. And her findings have shown that most women who are seeking fertility assistance can't accurately identify their fertile days of their menstrual cycle. And of course, by educating women about their fertile signs through fertility awareness, women can be taught to be able to identify when they're fertile, to increase their overall knowledge of how their fertility works, and to understand their menstrual cycles better. And Kerry is also a leader in professional development in her field, having developed programs that teach natural fertility education to professionals, such as nurses, midwives, naturopathic doctors, etc., so that they can offer proper support to their clients and helping them to understand their menstrual cycles. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Kerry.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm pleased to be speaking with you.
I'm so happy to have you today. And so I did give you a little bit of an introduction, but I'd love for you to talk a bit about your background and the work and research that you've been doing in the area of fertility awareness and fertility literacy.
Well, this is a great interest of mine, an interest that I've had for many years, and it started when I was a nurse in training in the 70s. I had an interest in women's health. And in the various areas that I worked in women's health, I just became very aware that women had very little understanding of their menstrual cycle, when they were fertile and when they weren't, and that there seemed to be a very strong association between poor knowledge and women having unplanned pregnancies, and poor knowledge and women finding it difficult to actually get pregnant. So I started off teaching women about fertility awareness at a family planning clinic, and I realized from that experience that I wanted to spend more time in this particular area. So about 20 years ago now, I established myself as an independent practitioner in fertility awareness, and then liaised with general practices, IVF clinics, women's health services, and started teaching fertility awareness more on a full-time basis. And as I was doing that, I became aware that I wanted to do research in the area, and so that led me to do the first research project looking at what women's needs were around support to practice fertility awareness for contraception. So that was my graduate diploma in health education. And then I became very interested in what does fertility mean to women. So that led me to my master's thesis that was towards a feminist philosophy of fertility consciousness. And then more recently, I became very interested in infertility and IVF, and the fact that I think that many women go to IVF, but they haven't really tested their fertility because they don't have sufficient knowledge of the fertile window of the menstrual cycle to test their fertility. So that led me to do my PhD thesis.
Okay.
Which is looking at developing a new model of care to improve the fertility awareness of women in primary health care.
I'm looking forward to talking about that later on. And for any of the listeners who are tuning in, maybe for the first time, or maybe aren't as familiar with fertility awareness, perhaps you could kind of give a description of what fertility awareness is to kind of start us off.
Yep. Fertility awareness is simply defined as women's ability to identify in their menstrual cycle when they are fertile and when they are not, when they are capable of getting pregnant and when it's not possible to get pregnant. Basically, there are three methods of fertility awareness. There's rhythm, which is counting days in the menstrual cycle, and that's not very accurate. And I'd be very happy to come back and talk a little bit more about that. Then there is temperature, which is a retrospective indicator of fertility. So that's often poorly understood by women and health practitioners alike, I have to say. And then the third method is mucus, which is my favorite method because it is the most effective method. You can learn a lot about a woman's fertility through mucus patterns. It's quite extraordinary what you can learn and understand about her fertility, about her health, about why she's not being able to get pregnant, etc. So mucus is a wonderful way of developing an understanding of fertility awareness.
Mm-hmm. Well, that brings me perfectly into the next question, which is maybe you could talk a bit about the difference between the rhythm method and the mucus method so that our listeners have a good understanding of why the rhythm method doesn't work and why the mucus method does work.
Okay, that's really important, and I hope that there are a lot of women out there listening to your program because it's poorly understood. Rhythm was developed in the 30s, and very little was known about really just how accurate rhythm was until more recently, perhaps in the last decade or so. And what we have found from recent research is that rhythm is only accurate for about 30% of women who have a regular menstrual cycle. So by counting days up, even for women who have a regular menstrual cycle, they will only get it right in about 30% of cases. That's really very low. And of course, rhythm can't be used by women who have an irregular cycle. But unfortunately, it seems to me from clinical practice observations and from the two studies that I've done here in Melbourne that when women are looking at fertility awareness for fertility management, rhythm is actually what they're doing. I have to say, from my experience and from what I read in the literature, rarely do women apply the necessary calculations to use the rhythm method correctly. I've been teaching rhythm for decades, or I should say, teaching fertility awareness for decades now, not rhythm. And, I've seen thousands of women, and not one of those women, not one who has come and they're already practicing fertility awareness, which is typically rhythm, what they're using, not one of them has ever applied the calculations. I think that's quite revealing. So often women think about rhythm in terms of the 28-day menstrual cycle and ovulation occurring about day 14, 15, wherever. And of course, we know that there is much bigger variation in the timing of ovulation, even in the monthly menstrual cycle, than ovulation always occurring around about day 14. So it's not unusual for women to have unplanned pregnancies with rhythm, and it's not unusual for women to experience long-term infertility by focusing around, the day 14, 15, thereabouts.
I think that's such an important point because since we're always told that we're fertile all the time and that we're always told that our cycles are 28 days all the time and that we're always ovulating on day 14, I don't think women realize that if you actually follow that and have sex on a particular day every month, that you could actually be preventing yourself from getting pregnant. I think that that's not something that women know. And so maybe you could talk a little bit, kind of delve into this topic a little bit more and talk a little bit about menstrual cycle variation and just why day 14 isn't actually accurate for many women.
Very important topic. Um, the first thing to say is there is huge variation in menstrual cycle length and fertility patterns within the menstrual cycle from woman to woman. Huge variation. Some women can typically ovulate around about, day 7, 8, 9, 10. Other women who have who have longer menstrual cycles might not ovulate until around about day 28, 29, 30. So where fertile window falls very much depends upon how long the menstrual cycle is. Typically, what I experience in clinical practice is that women come in, say, with shortish cycles, day 26, 27 days long, or longer cycles around about day 36. They're still talking about ovulation around about day 14. And it just doesn't work like that. The shorter the cycle is, typically the earlier ovulation occurs. The longer the cycle is, the later ovulation will occur. Many women don't realize either that it's possible to get pregnant with sex in the menstrual period.
Mm-hmm.
And for women who have a 26-day cycle or less on a fairly regular basis, they might be fertile during the menstrual period regularly during their period. Women might get away with it for quite some time, having sex during their period, thinking that that's a safe time, and then they won't. And that's as a nurse working in unplanned pregnancy, that's something that cropped up quite a lot. So women can ovulate quite close to a period, or very soon after the period stops, and they can ovulate sometimes quite close to just before their period starts. So the fertile window can sometimes be as short as a half a day at some point within the menstrual cycle, or it could extend over a couple of weeks long as a woman tries to ovulate many times. So if a woman has a delay in ovulation in her menstrual cycle, she will typically have a long mucus pattern leading into when ovulation eventually occurs. And a woman can only know what goes on within her individual menstrual cycle if she actually tracks her mucus patterns within the menstrual cycle. For instance, if I want to talk about how important this knowledge is when women are trying to get pregnant, I have seen women who have been trying to get pregnant. One woman I can think of in particular trying to get pregnant for 3.5 years. And it wasn't until she's tracked her menstrual cycle that we were able to identify she only had a half a day of a window of fertility. She only noticed fertile type mucus on a half a day of her entire menstrual cycle. Once she got that organized in her head, in fact, she was pregnant the next cycle, which is
Wow.
quite extraordinary. And she had seen numerous practitioners in traditional health settings as well as alternative health settings, and everyone had kind of given her their advice from their particular perspectives, but no one had actually taught her to understand her individual fertility.
Mm-hmm.
And tracking is important because variability is so huge. Another example of that is a woman trying to get pregnant for 13 years, and she didn't understand the relationship between fertility and lifestyle. And once she understood the relationship between fertility and lifestyle, she was able to see why she was ovulating very, very late in her menstrual cycle, and she was focusing around about day 13, 14. But for that woman, she had about 2 weeks of mucus leading up to ovulation that was occurring more towards the end of the cycle. And I can talk a little bit about that more later when we talk about lifestyle and fertility, if you like.
Okay, well, maybe we could talk a little bit about that now, since you brought it up. So, when you say lifestyle, what do you mean by that in her case?
A growing lifestyle problem or growing problem in relation to fertility is being overweight or obese. And when a woman has put on weight that is greater than what is healthy, there can be a delay in ovulation. That's the way being overweight or obese affects fertility. It delays ovulation. So there may be multiple attempts at ovulation in the menstrual cycle before ovulation actually happens. And women can observe this. They can actually observe this happening if they understand mucus. And what they would notice is long stretches or weeks of mucus, or mucus coming and going until eventually ovulation occurs. So this particular woman thought that because she had been trying to get pregnant for 13 years and it hadn't happened, she thought she wasn't ovulating. And we were able to establish in the first chart that she documented that yes, she was ovulating, but she was ovulating much later than she thought. And because of the impact of weight, the second part of her menstrual cycle was collapsing. So yes, she was ovulating, but the luteal phase, which is the time between ovulation and a period, which needs to be at least 11 days long for conception to occur, that was too short. So once she understood that she was ovulating, she was greatly encouraged. Once she understood the relationship between weight and fertility, she was encouraged to lose some weight. And what we saw is her luteal phase lengthen, and she conceived in the 7th month of trying.
Wow, after
After 13
13
years of
years.
13 years of infertility. Yeah. And thinking that there was something very seriously wrong, that she wasn't ovulating because she would have gotten pregnant if she was ovulating. But by charting her cycle, she was able to see that she was ovulating, and that was all that was required to help her go the next steps.
Mm-hmm. And one of the messages, of course, that we talk about so much on the podcast is the implications of fertility awareness, beyond just getting pregnant, how your charts are really a tool of your overall health and how much information you can truly gather from them. And the examples that you talked about, especially the first example with the woman with only a half a day of cervical mucus present, it really highlights the importance of cervical mucus in this process, especially if you only have such a short window. If you have sex on every other day and you have no cervical mucus, you can't get pregnant. So maybe you could talk a little bit about cervical mucus and why it's so important for women when it comes to conceiving.
Yes. To add to that story, that woman was preparing to go on an IVF program. And within a month, she had conceived because she understood her fertility. And I think
You
it's
just saved
sad,
her
isn't it?
$10,000 at least.
Yes, at least. Yeah, yeah. Yes, I think that's something else that people don't fully appreciate. IVF is fabulous technology for women who truly do need it. But it's still not that effective, really. And on average, here in Australia, a woman needs to undergo 5 IVF cycles on average, before conception occurs. I mean, some women can go on an IVF program and get pregnant straight away, but on average, about 5 are needed. So, yes, each cycle is somewhere around about $8,000. So it's very distressing. It's a very rigorous, difficult medical thing to engage with. So you were asking me about the importance of fertile mucus.
Mm-hmm.
Fertile mucus gives you so much information about fertility. It can help you identify where in the cycle ovulation is occurring. On average, women will have about 6 days of fertile mucus leading up to ovulation, but a woman is most fertile in that 3-day period just before ovulation occurs. And for most women, ovulation occurs just before the mucus stops. So the mucus starts and there's not very much of it, and women don't sense it very much. And then as the mucus changes leading up to ovulation, the water content increases. And as the water content increases, it becomes more obvious to women. They can sense it more readily at the vulva. And if they're lucky, they might see some, but not all women see fertile mucus. And the closer sex occurs around ovulation time, within that 3-day window, the higher the chance of getting pregnant. So the chance of getting pregnant when the mucus first starts in the cycle is something like 3% on average. And then the chance of getting pregnant at the peak time within that 3-day window just before ovulation occurs, depending on a woman's age group, if she was a younger woman, around about 25% or 20%. And as women get older, the chance actually decreases. But for any woman wanting to optimize her fertility, understanding that 3-day period just before ovulation occurs is very important, particularly if they've been trying to get pregnant for quite some time. And, you know, sex is a wonderful aspect of people's relationships, but it can become trying if they're trying to get pregnant all the time and nothing is happening and they're getting distressed. It's really nice for women to be able to know their cycle and have sex when they feel like having sex, because that's what they want to do just for pleasure. And knowing at this, when they're fertile and then when it might be possible for them to get pregnant. So to be able to kind of separate that out a little bit, I think can be quite helpful for women. There's been lots of studies now that have been done around the world that have validated the importance of mucus. And some more recent studies have suggested actually the age-related decline in fertility might not be so marked if women had greater fertility awareness, when they're in their 35 leading up to 40 age group. So yeah, it's really, really important. The other thing that is really important to know about mucus is that in the books that you typically can pick up in the bookshops, take off their shelves, they often have these lovely color plates about what fertile mucus looks like, like raw egg white, stringy, stretch it between your fingers. I think it's really important to emphasize that that's the kind of thing that women might see when they're really in their teenage years, early 20s, if they're not on the pill.
Mm-hmm.
If they're on the pill, they won't see it. As women get older, the amount of mucus that they release from the cervix leading up to ovulation diminishes. So women in their 30s, heading towards their 40s, early 40s, they might say to you, look, I've heard about that fertile mucus. I know what it should, I should be looking for, but I've never seen it in myself.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really important for women to know. You don't need to see it. If it's there, it means that it will help you get pregnant. If you're having a menstrual cycle at all, you will notice fertile mucus. So don't think about trying to find it from a visual perspective, like digital examination, searching for the mucus and then trying to kind of stretch it between your fingers. Forget all that. Don't do that. All you need to do is think about what the feeling is at the vulva as you walk around throughout the day. And what a woman will realize by doing that is that after the period, there is a day or two or three of a kind of a nothingness or a dryness. And then a feeling of moistness will begin. And that feeling of moistness will build up more to a greater feeling of moistness or to a wetness. And then it will dramatically stop. If a woman can notice that sensation change from moistness through to a wetness, even if she doesn't see any mucus, it's still telling her she's fertile. And that's really important because women only think they're fertile if they can see this nice stretchy mucus. If they can see that, it's possible to get pregnant. If they can't see that, then they can't. It's something we should be emphasizing with women. It's more about what you sense, not what you see. And it's important probably not to do digital examinations to try and find fertile mucus, because when you do that, that causes other kinds of mucus to be secreted, and women will try and kind of work out what's fertile and what's not fertile, and it creates a great deal of confusion. In the work that I do, I keep fertility awareness education very simple, quite pared down. Just think about what the sensation is as you walk around throughout the day. Write that up on your chart in the end of the evening. And over the course of the menstrual cycle, you will see this wonderful pattern form. And over a number of menstrual cycles, you'll just become more and more confident about what that pattern means for you.
I think that's a really interesting way. I've never heard it described that way. And as you were describing it, you know, it occurred to me that I often know, like, just based on the way it feels, what I'm going to see. Because I check with toilet paper, so I don't do internal checks
Yep,
anymore. So I wipe and then look,
yep.
and it occurred to me as you were talking that you can, like, of course, you can actually feel the difference. So I think that that's brilliant. I think it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, and the toilet paper test is a good addition as well. So you can be walking to the loo, ask yourself, what does it feel like as you're walking? And then when you wipe the vulva after doing a wee, does the toilet paper slip or is there a draggy kind of feeling? So if you've walked to the loo and it kind of feels moist or wet, and then the toilet paper slips a bit, you're fertile. You're in the fertile time of the menstrual cycle.
Hmm.
I don't know if you've read the amazing work of Professor Odeblad. Have you ever read his work?
No, I don't think I have yet.
Okay, well, he is an amazing scientist, a biophysicist, obstetrician, gynecologist, and he studied the anatomy and physiology of the cervix for about 40 years
Mm.
and said we still only knew a smidge of what we could learn from how the cervix works as a gateway to fertility. And so you'll find a lot of information about fertile mucus if you look up his work.
And what's his name again?
Odeblad, Odeblad.
Okay.
Professor Odeblad, Eric Odeblad,
Okay. Well,
Erik.
it's so funny. I've read some very interesting research studies that go through all the different types and they tested, like, all the
Yep.
different, yeah, it's really interesting taking pictures of what do they call it? The ferning
Yeah, yeah, that's his
and
work. That's
yeah.
basically his work, his beautiful work. Mm.
Okay. And so why is cervical mucus necessary for pregnancy?
Cervical mucus is fundamental for pregnancy. If cervical mucus is not there, it's not possible to get pregnant. Cervical mucus forms a road system for sperm to get into the cervix and then for it to be capacitated to then travel out or through the uterus and then out into the fallopian tubes where pregnancy occurs. So cervical mucus is amazing stuff. It as I said, it forms a road system, and it forms a road system by through channels. Actually, if you were to look at cervical mucus under a very, very high-powered microscope, you would be able to see around peak time of fertility something like 250, 300 channels.
Mm.
And these channels have negative pressure within them. So as soon as sperm swim out of the seminal fluid and make contact with fertile type mucus, they get sucked into the channels and then directed up into the cervix, where they might have some rest and recreation for several hours or more. And then they get slowly fed out into the fallopian tube. So from one active intercourse, there could be a steady supply of sperm over 2 or 3 days.
Hmm. And then without cervical mucus, when it's not there, what happens to the sperm?
The sperm don't know where to go. And if the fertile mucus is not there, that means that there is a mucus plug in the cervix. And the mucus plug is a thick, dense cellular plug that prevents sperm from entering the uterus. And at that time in our menstrual cycle, sperm are recognized as being unnecessary. So when ejaculation occurs in the vagina, all sorts of mechanisms come into play to white blood cells come pouring out through the wall of the vagina to gobble up the sperm and clear them away. In addition to that, the pH of the vagina is a little bit lower, and that actually prevents sperm from continuing to live. So either the plug is in place in the cervix or fertile mucus is being released. And of course, the cervix is open during a period. But in between periods, if a woman has a feeling of dryishness or nothingness, that means at the vulva, that means that the plug is in place. If she has a feeling of moistness or wetness, that means fertile mucus is coming through and that she's in the fertile phase and pregnancy is a possibility. So the wonderful thing about mucus is that a woman can get to know her own particular body and know from a day-to-day basis whether she is fertile or whether she is not.
Hmm. Well, and I loved what you said about about how fertility awareness can kind of help women reconnect and enjoy sex even during the times when they're trying. And what really struck me when you said that is that when you can identify the small window of time that you can actually get pregnant, then it kind of frees up all the rest of it. And so
That's
you can
exactly.
just have fun and enjoy your partner and reconnect knowing that you can't get pregnant anyway. So the pressure is totally off for a large portion of your cycle. And I would imagine that that would be so helpful, especially for women who've been trying for a really long time. Every time they have sex, it's trying, you know?
Yep, yep, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And if women were to take a rhythm approach, they need to have sex over a much more longer period because they don't quite know where ovulation is occurring. And that can be quite trying for some couples, not all couples, but for some couples. But with mucus, they can specifically identify where that fertile window is and be quite targeted and in their attempts at getting pregnant. There's something else I'd like to say about that too, and that is when couples are trying to get pregnant, and this might seem a little bit odd, but when they're trying to get pregnant, it's on their mind to have sex to kind of get pregnant. Sometimes they can imagine that they have sex far more often than they actually do.
Mm.
So if a woman is charting her cycle, documenting it on a day-to-day basis, and then writing on a chart where she has sex, it's amazing what they realize. Oh, I thought I was doing it much more often than this.
Yeah.
And that brings up another case study that which I learned a lot from quite some years ago. A woman had been trying to get pregnant for 7 years.
Mm.
She had been trying to get pregnant for 7 years. And I said to her, "How much do you know about your menstrual cycle?" And she said, "Well, not very much." And we got to the fourth menstrual cycle and no sex had occurred. And then I started to ask her about that. And she said, "Oh, well, yes, absolutely. We want to get pregnant." And it does seem strange, doesn't it? But, um, but no, she was in a loving relationship. Things were fine within, in all aspects of their life. But having sex was just not something they got around to doing. So by charting her menstrual cycle and being able to identify the fertile window, not having a very big sex drive, either of them, they were able to be quite targeted and they conceived in their second menstrual cycle, the second time they had had sex in 7 months.
Wow.
Yes.
That is a very interesting story. But I mean, I feel like life is busy. And
Yeah.
I remember this television show I used to watch. This couple, had sex every single night, right? That was their thing. And I just thought, how many couples have that much sex? And if you, like you said, if you write it down, you can really realize, like, if you're having sex once or twice a week, you could be missing your window every month.
Yes, absolutely.
And I
Mm.
would say that's
I,
pretty average. I don't know what average is. I have no idea. But like, if you're having sex once or twice a week, it is possible that you are fully missing your window every time.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I've come across quite a number of people in that position.
And I just want to say, I'm not saying that you should go out and have sex every single day. Like, I'm not suggesting that
No,
that's the
no.
solution. More so, being able to
Yeah,
target the specific window is more of the
yeah.
realistic solution there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you're right. And look, who knows what average is?
Who cares,
You can
really?
read various statistics, but but it's a very personal, couple related kind of activity, and it's highly variable. How often people have sex. So if women understand their fertility, it means that they're able to. Uh, I've lost my words here. Um, So it doesn't really matter what routines they have within their relationship. If they want to get pregnant, they've got the knowledge upon which to base their sexual intercourse times on. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I wanted to, because this kind of ties into the research that you did. So, in your research study, Fertility Awareness Knowledge, Attitudes, and Practices of Women Seeking Fertility Assistance,
Mm.
we kind of touched on this already, but you found that only a small number of women who are actually seeking assisted reproductive technology, so seeking infertility treatments, could actually accurately identify their fertile window. And so we've talked a lot about why that's so important. And so, what are the implications of this? When it comes to the increasing number of women who are having difficulty conceiving, seeking assisted reproductive technology. And maybe when you answer the question, you could also touch on some of the issues that arise with assisted reproductive technology.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, this is a really big issue, and I think a lot more research is needed for us to fully understand it. I work in a medical practice teaching fertility awareness, and often the women are given a medical referral to myself for fertility awareness education, and they're given a referral to an IVF clinic at the same time. So, if a woman is trying to get pregnant for quite some time, it is important that they are fully investigated to make sure that there's not a medical problem that needs to be addressed. But many of those women will take up the offer of seeing myself because they are aware that they know very little, and they feel that they're being referred to an IVF clinic for high tech, highly expensive, highly intrusive, tertiary level care, but really they're not sure whether they've got the timing right. And so they come along to learn about that. And I haven't really looked at what percentage of women become pregnant through fertility awareness compared to just going straight to IVF. And that's something I should do in the future and will do in the future. But many of those people become pregnant, quite quickly. And so we talked a little bit about how often people have sex, and couples experience lots of pressures these days, work-related pressures, economic pressures, you know, mortgages are very high in Australia. There are lots of pressures. Some women are quite happy to go straight to IVF and just kind of have that high-tech intervention, but many women are not, and they might go there and feel that this is not for me. But there aren't that many people out there who provide the kind of service that I provide, and it's very hard to get good good education, good direction within the medical system to kind of get this type of education. What I found in that study was that only 13% of women could correctly identify the fertile window of the menstrual cycle, and nearly all of those women had been trying to get pregnant for a year or more. So I'm not sure what the procedures are for you in your country, but here in Australia, once a woman has been trying to get pregnant for 12 months or more, then they can get a referral to IVF. There were only a couple of women in the study who were referred earlier than a year, and they had known medical conditions for which that no amount of education would have helped them. So it was important within that study that I learned that many women were applying a rhythm approach. A good number of them were doing temperature but misunderstood it. They thought that they were most fertile after the temperature had gone up rather than just before the temperature rise in the menstrual cycle. And women were saying, yes, they understood mucus, but then when they were asked to describe how they were observing it, they couldn't, or they didn't, or they misunderstood it. So 64% knew that they, or believed that they always knew or mostly knew when they were fertile in the menstrual cycle. But when their knowledge was put to the test, only 13% did. In addition to that, we've never really looked at how interested women are in fertility awareness when they're having trouble getting pregnant. But in that study, we did look at that, and we found that 87% had actively tried to improve their knowledge from one or more sources of the information. And the main sources of information for them were the internet, books, and GPs. So why those sources of information are not translating into good knowledge, we don't know. But it might have something to do with just not completing the process of learning about fertility, not having adequate support to integrate information into actual personal knowledge. So you might look up on the internet and get an understanding of mucus, but if you don't have support to document that and understand it correctly, then you're not going to understand it correctly. And a woman needs to document a minimum of 3 menstrual cycles with mucus to have a good understanding of mucus. Theoretical knowledge of temperature is of no help, because you actually do need to do it for it to work. So to think that your temperature will go up around about day 14 and so there's no point, that's no help. And of course rhythm is not a help either. So yeah, it was very disappointing to see such low levels of knowledge in women who had been trying to get pregnant for 12 months or more and finding themselves at an IVF clinic. So the conclusion to that study is that women are very interested in this area of their reproductive health, but the sources of knowledge they're going to are not improving their knowledge that much, and that if a woman does arrive at an art clinic and they haven't got the timing right over a minimum of 6 months, that means they might not have actually tested their knowledge, they've tested their fertility properly, and therefore they may be there unnecessarily.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what you said about how a large number of the women who do come to see you at the same time that they've been referred to IVF who do conceive, that's quite troubling, because to go through all of that financial, emotional hardship when it's you're the second cycle, third cycle, you're getting pregnant, that's huge, and the implications are so serious, I think. And I have simultaneously in my head two ways I want to go. But what do you see as the solution? I know one of the things that you were looking at in the study is how to educate primary healthcare providers, because kind of acknowledging that women are going to their doctors and they are going to their nurses looking for this information, but these doctors are not educated about fertility awareness in particular, so they're not getting they're not getting what they need. So maybe you could talk about what you feel are some of the possible solutions to this serious issue.
Well, the upshot of my PhD was that there was a great deal of agreement between doctors and nurses that nurses were ideally placed within general practice to be able to take up this role of fertility awareness education for women. I'm not sure what it's like in your country, but in Australia, consultation times in general practice are usually short. It's not enough time to educate women, in a 10 to 15 minute consultation time. Consultations in Australia are expensive. They vary from geographic location to geographic location, but they're around about $70, $75 if a doctor is not bulk billing, and therefore the consultation would be totally paid by Medicare. So consultations can be up around $70, $75 for 15 minutes. For a woman to really understand this, they really need to be able to sit down with someone for a minimum of 20 minutes to a half an hour for the first consultation, and then about the same for the subsequent consultations, for them to fully understand what they've documented and to understand the implications of that for their fertility. So women require longer consultation times, and they require usually a number of consultations. And so I think that to get doctors to do this kind of work, some doctors are interested, and that's terrific, and if that's wonderful. But I think it's probably best if doctors and nurses work together, and nurses work very well as health educators. There's lots of studies that suggest that they do very well in this area. Most nurses are women, and it's possible that women might feel more comfortable being with another woman to kind of learn this. to ask the questions. It might be easier for a female practitioner, as in a nurse, to convey this kind of information rather than a male practitioner. So I think that was really the conclusion of my PhD. To move this along, we need professional development, and we need more nurses in general practice to be interested in the area, educated in the area, and to work cooperatively or in team care relationships with GPs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's so important because however this knowledge can be brought to women and kind of put on their radar, to know how important it is. And one of the topics that I wanted to kind of briefly touch on today, when I was reading through your master's thesis, so towards a feminist philosophy of fertility consciousness, one of the things that you talked about that struck me, because I've felt this way for many, many years, is that I guess it's in relation to the hormonal birth control or the birth control pill, and how it's always kind of shown to be this symbol of women's liberation. And as we're talking today, it should become very apparent how important actually learning about your fertility is, and how empowering it truly is to be able to know what's happening in your body. That's a serious difference between the complete lack of information about your body that being on the pill leaves you with. And so in your thesis, you kind of introduced the whole concept of fertility consciousness. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and why maybe you don't see the pill as being the symbol of women's liberation.
Yes. Oh, that's a big topic.
I know.
um, yeah, oh gosh, where do you start? I think the first thing to say is that women believe that they should have access to fertility awareness in their school education. There's a strong belief among women that this is such an important aspect of their being, of their health. It should be part of their secondary school education. It's a life skill, really. So we learn about the importance of healthy food and exercise. How strange that we don't teach women about fertility and fertility rhythms and how to read them and understand them. Women have also said that they'd like to get this kind of knowledge really from their mothers when they're younger. They feel a little bit sad by the fact that, their mothers watch them go into puberty but don't really teach them much about fertility. A real focus at that time between mothers and daughters is about menstrual health, like how to deal with periods. Well, a period is an end result of ovulation. I think both aspects of the cycle are important. And then they believe, this is from my master's thesis, they believe that when they go to medical practitioners to talk about contraception, they believe that they should have equal access to this kind of knowledge as they do to the pill or any other method. So it should be one of the options that is openly discussed, and women should be supported to make the decision that best suits their needs, the decision that they feel most comfortable with. So women find it very difficult to get access to good, clear, straightforward information about fertility awareness. It seems to be shrouded a little bit. So when women go to doctors to get contraception, or to family planning clinics and get contraception, yes, there tends to be a focus on just a restricted range of methods, and that often is the pill, IUDs, Implanon. I don't know if they have Implanon in your country.
What is that?
And I think Implanon is a little rod impregnated with progesterone that they implant in the arm, and it stays there for about 3 years and works as a contraceptive.
It might be called Norplant here.
It might be, yes. I think contraception is one of the most difficult areas of women's life. It's something that they need to think about for about 30 years. And I think it's something they need to feel they understand and they feel comfortable with whatever method that they choose. But I don't know how a woman actually makes an informed decision about any contraceptive method until they fully understand and appreciate their fertility and how that method actually impacts their fertility. I'm not saying a woman shouldn't use those other methods, but I do think that women should be educated to understand their fertility and how these various methods work. And if women actually were given that support, they actually might use these methods actually a little bit more effectively than sometimes they do. One of the problems that women talked about in the master's thesis a lot was that when they go along to a doctor and they talk about when they want contraception, they get offered a restricted range of choices, and it often is the pill. And many women want to take the pill and are happy to take the pill and feel comfortable taking the pill, and that's terrific. But many women don't, but they're not supported not to take it if they don't want to. And I think that's problematic, because women can then be prescribed the pill, but they won't take it, and then they don't have a contraceptive method, basically. And that happens quite a lot. Um, yeah, it's a big issue. I think that there should be broader discussions around contraception. All methods should be on the table, and women should be supported to freely choose rather than get funneled into what the favoured method is at the time. Because women are so individual, and so are their relationships.
Well, and yeah, part of me thinks it's paternalistic and condescending, I guess, to have that idea that you can't be trusted, so you need to be on a steady dose of hormones to make sure the shop is closed. I guess that's just kind of my own opinion, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but that's how I feel, because I feel like actually I'm an adult and I'm capable of not being on the pill and not getting pregnant. And I feel like that's kind of the message, like, well, if you're not on some sort of hormone, then you're going to get pregnant. And that's the only effective method. And that's the message. And
yes, that's often the message that women are given to kind of push them in that direction so that they will take the pill. Yeah.
So well, that's one of the reasons that I do this, so that at least women can know that despite what you've heard, the fertility awareness method, when used correctly, when you learn it, properly, and especially if you're able to learn from an instructor, that it is an effective and reliable method of birth control. It gives you control, and it gives you also the opportunity to learn how your cycle works. And so just to kind of conclude our interview today, because I know we're kind of getting a little over time actually, but I just have a few questions that I usually like to ask towards the end. And so the first one is, what would you say is the most common myth or misconception about fertility that you would like to see corrected?
Gosh, I think the biggest one is that you just have sex and you'll get pregnant.
It's just that simple.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
There's like a 1,000 women listening that are like, gee, if you had only told me that.
Yes, and I acknowledge it's an important component, but it depends on where in the menstrual cycle that sex occurs as to what the chances of pregnancy will be. So that's really important. I think the second one is that rhythm is effective. It's not, it's a poor method. And it's been surpassed by decades, or 4 decades, by mucus. Mucus is extraordinary. Mucus will give you so much information about fertility. So if you're wanting to learn about fertility awareness, it really should be based on mucus, and learn it from an up-to-date, well-informed instructor. And if you do that, you'll understand it within 3 months. I come across women who go to a whole range of different sources, and a year or two down the track, they still don't really fully grasp it. So I think it is something that needs to be talked through with someone who understands it well. And the third fertility myth. Um, if you're fertile if you can see stringy mucus, and you're not fertile if you can't see it. I see that so often. So it's not about seeing fertile mucus, it's about sensing it at the vulva, being able to know the difference between what it feels like when mucus is there and what it feels like when mucus is not. That is the best way to identify the fertile time of the menstrual cycle, not finding stretchy mucus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so good. And for women who are struggling with infertility, what advice, if any, would you give to them?
I would advise them to see a fertility instructor. I'd advise them to chart their menstrual cycle, get a really good understanding of their fertility patterns, because that can tell them whether they're ovulating at a time in their menstrual cycle when they can get pregnant, or whether they're ovulating quite late and the luteal phase is too short, which means they're ovulating but they can't get pregnant. And I would get them to look at their lifestyle, because lifestyle can have a huge impact on fertility. How much sleep they get, whether they're healthy weight, whether they're sedentary, whether they're exercising. Healthy lifestyle has such a huge impact on people's physical and emotional well-being. It can help prevent a whole range of health problems, and there is a strong relationship between healthy lifestyle and healthy fertility. There's a strong relationship between healthy lifestyle and pregnancy health, and then health outcomes afterwards. So both of those things should be really emphasized when women are trying to get pregnant. But if a woman has been trying to get pregnant for a period of time, like 12 months or more, it is very important that they do see a medical practitioner and have the necessary tests just to make sure that everything is okay. So they are the three basic things that I would talk about: fertility awareness, lifestyle, and just be medically tested to ensure that they're okay.
And I'll just throw in there that you might want to get the man tested too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yes, fertility testing means both. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. Yes. And for them to engage in the lifestyle,
Mm-hmm.
health promoting, because it's not only lifestyle that affects female fertility, it can affect male fertility as well.
Okay, and one very last question. So for women who are listening who might be on the pill or some sort of hormonal contraceptive, but they know they want to have a baby, say in the next few years, maybe 2 or 3, what advice, if any, would you give to them?
Um, the well, I think where I'd start was, are they interested in fertility awareness? How important is it? How important is contraception for them over, however long they want it? Do they want to come off the pill and learn about fertility awareness and use that as contraception leading into pregnancy? I think that that is ideal, but how long women do that for before they try and get pregnant is very much an individual decision. But if women learn a little bit about fertility awareness before they try and get pregnant, they've already got the knowledge to start applying it straight away when they want to turn it around.
Mm-hmm. Well, Kerry, I just want to thank you so much for being here today. So for our listeners who are now inspired by your work and want to learn more, what's the best way for our listeners to find you online?
The best way to find me is to go to my website, Wise Woman Business. So it's all one word, and it's Wise Woman, not Wise Women, Wise Woman Business, or just simply Kerry Hampton, and it should come up. And so, are there any health professionals out there or people who want to become instructors? They're very welcome to attend the courses that I run here in Australia twice a year.
Okay. And I'll make sure to link to your website and also to your research studies, the ones that I mentioned, as well as some of the other ones that I had found. So there'll be lots of resources and links that you'll find on the show notes. And so I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate that you took the time today chatting with me all the way from Australia about fertility awareness. I'm very inspired by the work that you're doing. I just hope that during my lifetime, I can make such a significant impact as you have, because the work that you're doing is so important. And I was so happy and excited when I found your work, and that's why I contacted you right away. I thought, oh, I have to have Kerry on the podcast. She's amazing. So I really appreciate that you joined me today, and I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. It was a pleasure for me. I always enjoy talking about the topic, and I think that you're doing amazing work yourself by distributing all of this and making it accessible to women. That's what we need. So I think you're doing a great job. Thank you, Lisa.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, I would love it if you shared it with a friend and helped to spread the word. If you haven't yet subscribed to the podcast, just search for Fertility Friday on iTunes or Stitcher, and make sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Of course, I have some amazing guests coming up, and you definitely won't want to miss the upcoming episodes. And if you're loving the show, please leave an honest review on iTunes. Of course, a 5-star review would be awesome. Let me know how I'm doing. Let me know if you're loving the episodes. I'd love to hear from you. And this, of course, will help more people find the show. And as for me, you can find me on Twitter at Fertile Friday. You can stop by the blog and leave a comment in the show notes. So you'll find the show notes for today's episode at fertilityfriday.com/Kerry Hampton. You can also find me on the Fertility Friday Facebook page, which is facebook.com/fertilityfridays with an S. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.